Good evening and welcome. Tonight we bring to you the Balance in Business Initiative. Who leads? Who still cares? The board's perspective. My name is Florence Hamilton, for those of you who don't know me. I am an entrepreneur. I am an INSEAD alumni. I founded the Impact Mentoring program, and I lead the Balance in Business Initiative. The Balance in Business Initiative. Who are we? What do we do? We are a community of INSEAD alumni who got together with the main mission of engaging and inspiring leaders of today and tomorrow on why balance in business matters, how to implement it, and how to recognize the value it can create. It rests on three different pillars. The first one, which is at the core, is our Impact Mentoring Program. The Impact Mentoring Program was designed for women in mid to senior positions to empower them to achieve their goals. Why women in mid to senior positions? Because it is the quickest way of reaching the top and altering those small numbers, number one. And number two, because they will become, by getting at the top, they will become role models. And by role models, they'll have a direct impact on the talent pipeline. Mentoring to us is very much a two-way journey. Both mentees and mentors get a lot out of it. The mentees are empowered and they're supported in achieving their goals. But the mentors will learn from the mentees firsthand the insights onto what the actual challenges are. And with the knowledge of those actual challenges, plus the tools and other information that we provide them through the program, hopefully they will become agents for change in their own organizations, thus increasing our reach, increasing our impact. The second pillar is our partnering with corporates, which is really important because in the partnering with corporates, there's an exchange of knowledge and experiences, and through them, we can increase our reach. And we help them increase their own reach and their education on how to generate balance, on how to create balance. The third one is our outreach program. And our outreach program is through mainly events. And by having events, we engage not only the INSEAD alumni community, but also their extended network, such as yourselves all gathered tonight. This series of Balance in Business, Who Leads, Who Cares, started with the first one last November. And it was from the CEO's perspective. We had Ronan June, CEO of Verizon, Charlie Nunn, CEO of HSBC Private Wealth, Avivah Wittenberg-Cox, CEO of 21st Century, and Tiger Chagaran, CEO of Genpact. Today, we have the perspective of the board, and it continues on what we started building. It's on the why, the what's going on, how to implement it. And one last very important question. When will we stop talking and when will we start walking the talk? So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Helen. Helen Pitcher, OBE. She's an experienced chairman, board member, board facilitator, and coach. She works across a number of FTSE organizations, private clients, professional services, family businesses. In addition, she is a coach to many CEOs of very large organizations and NEDs. She was awarded an OBE for services to business in 2015. She's also president of the INSEAD Directors Network. All in all, she's a formidable person, and I will pass on the baton to her to lead the discussion.
What's more important is my role here tonight is to moderate this excellent panel that we have from different parts of the globe. So Stanislav is here with us from Moscow. We've got Byron from the States, and we've got Beatrice, who's calling in from Dubai. So it really is a truly diverse panel that we have. And I'm pleased to see that we are evidencing the importance of balance in business by having 2 females and 2 males. So if we just do the visible diversity, we have at least achieved that. And I'm sure as we start to share our experiences, you'll see even more diversity within the panel, which we will share where we can. My big challenge will be hopefully corralling everybody to give their contributions, because we could be here for 5 hours and I'm sure none of you want that. So we just want to share some vignettes of our experiences, really to encourage, challenge, debate, questions, etc. from you all. So I will encourage each of the panel to say something. I'm pleased to see that Avivah's here. I think Ronan is also in the audience. And those of you who follow LinkedIn, I thought Ronan's comment on International Women's Day, which was not that he chooses to challenge, he felt compelled to challenge, which I think is a really important and very, very strong statement. So we'll be linking the session that we had last time, which talked about the importance of leadership, the importance of owning the agenda and taking it forward. And as Florence said, we're now looking at it from the board perspective. So within the panel, if I start with Beatrice, Beatrice is also an experienced chair and general counsel and board member at Atlas Amara. She's had over 20 years experience in senior roles, so a great deal to share there. I'm also delighted to see Byron. Byron and I have worked on a couple of panels together now. Byron actually runs NASDAQ's governance solutions, and so has a wealth of experience to share across a range of businesses. And I'm sure he will be doing that for us shortly. And then we have Stanislav. Stanislav, as we know, is a senior affiliate professor at INSEAD. He is also a consummate author and researcher on important topics such as boardroom dynamics and the importance of the chair role and what works effectively there. And he will be sharing some really interesting insights with us. In addition to that, he's an experienced chairman himself, so he's not a theoretician. He can do the theory, but he knows the practice, and so has a wealth to share. And he also runs the Leading from the Chair program at INSEAD, as well as participating in the IDP. My role within INSEAD, aside from balance in business, is very much to be president of the International Directors Network, which is a growing network of some 1,600 alumni within INSEAD. So we would encourage you to join if this is a topic of interest to you. And balance in business is really, really important across the whole of INSEAD as it cuts to sustainability. So what I'd like to do now is just to invite each of my panelists to say a little bit about why this is so important. So if I can start with Beatrice, just why is balance in business important to you, and what insights can you share?
Thank you, Helen, and hello, everybody. First, a big thank you to Florence and the INSEAD team for organizing this really important and quite topical discussion. I can't believe we're still, talking about why balance is important, this day and age, but here we are. So let me start by maybe offering a few reflections and some perspectives that I would offer. First, I would offer my perspective as, chair of a board, but also my perspective as an executive that has gone through the ranks and understanding why balance is so important from that perspective. So for us, at the bank that I chair, and certainly the other boards that I sit on, it is a business imperative. We don't view balance as sometimes the way you tend to see it viewed as a corporate social responsibility type effort. For us, it is a balance, it is a business imperative. We, as a company, should reflect the demographics that we're serving. It is just that simple. We can't have a situation where the demographics is reflecting 50 odd, 49% women, and then you're showing up with the significantly lower percentage and thinking you can meaningfully engage. And two, we've seen, frankly, focusing on business imperative, that balance does help us attract talent. You know, talented folks, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Folks like to see themselves in leadership. So you will attract folks, you will attract very talented women and others if you reflect a very balanced leadership team. And, you know, finally, we have seen it in our numbers. The kind of innovative thoughts and creative thinking that we bring to the table as a collective is much, you know, more meaningful than when you have, you know, frankly, you know, just men or just women. So for us, it is a business imperative. I'll pause there and let others chime in.
Thank you, Beatrice. Byron, would you like to add to those comments as to why it's important from your perspective?
I'll message it.
You're on mute.
Got it. I'm on. Sorry about that. I'm trying to be careful. Thank you, Beatrice. Those thoughts are directly in line with my experience. My background is focused on and around being a corporate leader. I was a CEO of one company for 15 years, and then the company that I started in corporate governance 11 years ago was acquired by NASDAQ, and it was intentional to me and to us, our team, that's become a part of the NASDAQ corporate governance group. What was important, one of the things that was important to us is that NASDAQ is led by a woman leader, and I think it's probably one of the largest financial institutions in the world that's led by a woman, and I love it. I think it's a wonderful environment to be within because I like the diversity. I like living it as well as practicing it in our daily work at NASDAQ Governance Solutions. A significant part of what we do are board performance evaluations, and out of that has come a steady evolution of balance in the boardroom, not only gender, but also a wider variety of cognitive and experience and skills diversity. So I look forward to us knocking these ideas around. I'm seeing it benefit boards. I've worked with many boards for now 7-8 years and see them steadily improving as they engage around the kinds of topics we're going to talk about. But specifically, diversity in the boardroom has been beneficial to the performance of boards. And I think we're seeing resiliency in the markets. We've got a lot of work to do over the next year to come out of this whole COVID thing, but we're seeing some resilience in the economies that has surprised me, frankly. So thank you for having me today. I'm looking forward to this.
Thank you, Byron. That's an important point. Stanislav, over to you.
Thank you, Helen. Hi, everybody. I will share two, I would say, personal thoughts on this question. I think one is very pragmatic. I'm very much interested in board chairs, as Helen described. And if we look at the situation today, it's a shame that we're not using almost half of a potential pool for selecting people for chairs positions. So it's just good business to extend the pool. And the second reason is probably emotional to me. I think it's just not right that we don't have a balance in business in the year 2021. We don't have a balance in the boardroom.
Okay, thank you. So a lot of commonality of views there in terms of it's a business imperative, it's an absolute must, it contributes to performance, and we're missing out on the talent pool if we don't balance our businesses. So that was really helpful and really insightful in terms of where we are on that. And there are a number of businesses who are achieving it. Diageo is often quoted, but there are a number of big and small businesses who are achieving that balance. And there's no reason why we shouldn't. And when I link back to the CEO session in October, one of the topics that came up was the importance of flexibility in work patterns, which I think is really quite key because that also helps to attract diverse talent. And we now no longer have the excuse that we can't do that, because we've all learnt, working in a pandemic and COVID world, we do not have to be co-located. We can work from virtually anywhere. So that is hugely important and hugely helpful. So thank you for those insights. It's good business sense, and we really should do it. And that will lead us on later to the question of why are we still talking about it? Because those reasons, that rationale has been around ever since I've been in business. So, you know, it does not make sense. It is super to have Beatrice here as a female chair. Stanislav and I have worked on an initiative with a number of others to produce an action plan about how to accelerate women into the chairman role. And it is really, really important that we do this. So absolutely key. So that's the why. It's almost a no-brainer, but we still don't necessarily achieve it. What I'd like to do from here is move on to what's going on. And I think, Stanislav, if we start with you sharing some of your data, that will give an opportunity for the debate to continue.
Thank you, Helen. So I wanted to present some of the thoughts on what prevents us from being there. We all understand that it's a good business, that it should be done, but we're not there yet. So some ideas on why we're not there. And actually, there are two dimensions to balance in the boardroom. The first one is directors, and we've done a tremendous progress on this dimension over the last few years. If you look at the numbers, both in the countries where you have quotas and you don't have quotas, we see that we're almost there if we look at the large organizations, public companies. But there is another dimension which is also very important, probably not less important, or maybe even more important, and that is people who are in the leadership positions in the boardroom, female chairs. And there, as you can see, the picture is very, very bleak. So we wanted to understand what prevents people from becoming board chairs in developed economies. We've talked to people who make nomination decisions. We talked to women who became chairs, and we talked to women who did not become chairs. And we came up with two hypotheses about this. The first explanation is there's a bias and discrimination. People who make nomination decisions just do not see women as potential candidates for the chair's position. The second hypothesis that we came up with was unwillingness of potential candidates to take on chair's role. It corresponds to the early research which was done on women in senior leadership positions, which indicated that some women are not as eager, and more women are not as eager as men to pursue career opportunities. So we had these two hypotheses when we wanted to test them on a relatively large sample from 13 developed economies. We had about 1,000 male chairs and 65 female chairs. So if the first hypothesis was right, then it would have been more difficult for women to become a board chair, which meant they should have had higher social capital, high human capital, high seniority in order to become a board chair. What we found that it was not more difficult for a woman with certain qualification to become a board chair than for a man. So basically, if qualifications are similar, it was even a little bit easier for a woman to become a board chair. But the problem was that the key qualification for a woman to become a chair is to be a CEO. And as you know from your from the first session of this series, the percentage of female CEO is very low. It's below 10% if we look at the sample of the economists that we looked at. So the big problem and the big reason for low number of female chairs is a low number of female CEOs. The second hypothesis was unwillingness of a large number of eligible women to become a chair. In order to test this hypothesis, we looked at male and female CEOs who stepped down from their jobs and wanted to find out what was the percentage of them who continue on to be board chairs. And what we found, that hypothesis was true for most of the countries, except actually for all 12 countries that we, for 12 out of 13 countries that we looked at. If you look at the United States, you have about 96% of CEO, of male CEO who become a board chair, and only 70% of female CEOs who become a board chair. The situation is similar in the UK, it is similar in France, but it is different in Sweden. Sweden is the only country out of the sample where the percentage of male and female CEOs becoming chairs was the same. So the conclusion was, yes, women were less willing to use this opportunity to become a board chair, and the Sweden was the only exception. So if I summarize the findings of our research, then there are probably two major findings. The first one is that we really have this issue with female CEOs, and we have also an issue with bias of people who make nomination decisions. They really want potential chair to have a CEO experience, and if that is the case, then automatically we limit number of eligible women to a very, very low number. And if nothing changes, then the women will remain a small minority for the decades to come by. The second conclusion is that we need to work with women to encourage them to advance into chair's position. We need to let them know that it's great to be a chair, that it's a very interesting job, and women can do it at least as well as men can do it. That's it for my presentation. Thank you.
Beatrice, before Byron asked the question, and I've seen his question in the chat, what was your route to CEO and chairman?
Chair, you mean, yeah, that's a very, in fact, I was going to, thank you so much, Helen, for asking that question, because I was going to offer it anyway. So I actually served as general counsel. Well, my background is I was a partner at a law firm for a long time before becoming general counsel, before joining the boards that I'm on. And my route to chair actually was not through the traditional CEO route. And that was what I was going to offer when we come to the what can we do, which is expanding the pool. So I joined the board and of course won the confidence of my fellow board members. When we lost our chair 2 years ago, they nominated me and elected me to serve as board chair.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you very much. And I think that will be an important debate when we get to it later, because the skills that are required for a chairman are not necessarily the skills that CEOs have. So that's quite an interesting debate for us to have. But Byron, you had a question about pay, I think.
Yes, I wondered, Stanislav, did you find that pay is similar across the sample groups that you reviewed?
Yes, there's no significant difference in compensation of female chairs and male chairs. That's not an issue.
Okay, thank you. And Sweden, why is Sweden so significantly different?
Well, there are two potential explanations. The first is sort of macro explanation, that in Sweden we have a high level of gender equality in general. Sweden started earlier, and they made more progress on this issue. So the women are more emancipated in Sweden than in most European countries. The second explanation is that some important shareholders, including Swedish government, and the Swedish government is an important shareholder, they for more than 10 years have specific programs to promote women into chairs positions. So it was a dedicated effort on part of the shareholders, some larger families, and also Swedish government, to make sure that women become board chairs.
Yeah, Okay, and I've just seen coming up in chat from John Perkis the comment that quite a few CFOs also become board chairs, and there are a number of female CFOs, certainly in the UK, and I would imagine globally. But Byron, what would your comments be on that?
One, I'll comment just an aside on Sweden. We have significant investment in the US NASDAQ from Sweden. And as you all likely know, NASDAQ is a part of the Swedish exchange. And I think that a part of this is there's been a steadily growing understanding of the biases that's been restricting the ascension of female CEOs over the last 10 years. And that change has hit a tipping point. And I will point back to Adina here at NASDAQ. She has terrific financial experience and leadership experience. And I think that partly to, implied in Beatrice's comment, I think is we're seeing people like Adina and Beatrice who are becoming exemplary of the fact that to Stanislav's point, it's a 50-50 proposition ultimately. We should be looking at it as an equal playing field, not for some biased reason that in fact, I tend to think this is more anecdotal, but in my work, I tend to find that women chairs are more organized. They like that part of the job a little more. I can't say exactly why, because that's a little more Stanislav's expertise, I think, but it's an observation because we do quite a bit of work in this area.
Okay, thank you. Stanislav, do you want to add anything there?
Maybe I can comment on the CE4 question. Again, about 85%, from 80 to 85% board chairs are former CEOs. So that's the major path. Yes, there are some chairs with the CE4 background, but if you look at the percentage of CE4s who become board chairs, this is still not very significant. It's higher than any other member of executive committee, but it's still not that high. So this is one of the ways forward. We should look for people who have business acumen. This is very important for a board chair, but you don't necessarily need to be CEO to develop this business acumen. And the CEO position is one of those positions which allows you to develop this business acumen. Actually, most of the CEOs have this developed business acumen, but this is a little bit moving forward.
Yeah, sure. And there's another comment just come up in chat where somebody's noted that more male CFOs make it to CEO than female CFOs. So that again, that's
the same as male versus female CEOs. I think the percentage of male CEOs and female male CFOs and female CFOs who become chairs pretty much correspond to percentage of male CEOs and female CEOs who become chairs. There is still this disparity. More female CEO, less female CEOs become chairs.
Yeah. Okay. And also, when we look back at Sweden, there's a lot more flexibility in the employment practices, and the paternity leave and maternity leave is equally shared, which we still haven't got to in a lot of the Western world, which I suspect is a factor as well.
It does have an impact at the early stage of the career, so that helps women to advance. It's not so relevant for chairs, but it does help at the early stage, and then it commutes.
Yeah, okay. I thought the other point you made that was really relevant is the bias in the nominations committees and how we can perhaps work with nominations committees to help them think more creatively about the pool that's in front of them and the candidates that are available, as well as also supporting women to be more confident and bold in their willingness to put themselves forward for the role. So we're starting to move into some of the how now, but I think we've established that it is important. We've now looked at the statistics, which are supremely depressing in terms of women in the chairman role. So before we move on to the how, somebody's just asked about racial issues. So race as well as gender is now becoming important. And someone else asked the specific, Stanislav, which is, did you include Estonia in your research?
No, we did not. I can show again. We look at the largest economies. Estonia, with all respect, does not belong to this category yet. Sorry, here's the sample.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good. So if we move from there into the how do we achieve this, who would like to kick off with some ideas of what we need to do and how we need to do it? There were some ideas in the CEO session last time around visible leadership in these areas and around flexibility in working patterns. And we're already starting to think that we need more creativity from nominations committees and probably from headhunters as well in terms of that, because the majority of chairman roles in quoted companies will go through headhunters. So Byron, do you want to kick off with your views as to how on earth we are going to achieve this gender parity, let alone putting in the additional facet of race parity?
A trend that I'm seeing, and one that I think is going to help advance this, is for women to become chair of the whatever committee is nominating and governance, but particularly the nominating piece of that. And that's a direct driver. We have seen this increasing rapidly over the last 3 years among US companies, and we're starting to see it in other companies globally.
Okay. Beatrice?
Yep, thank you, Helen. If I may chime in there from maybe some anecdotal thoughts to offer. So, I chair board, but I also sit on other boards. And what we've been doing actually recently is reviewing not just the nominating committee's charter, but also the board's charter. Because that's, what will drive a lot of, to make sure that, you have sufficient power there for the board to oversee things around, gender, diversity, etc., because that's where it starts. And then the nominating committees always, as a requirement, will ask for a slate that must always be a balanced slate when we're reviewing and assessing, potential new board members. And to date, I have yet to have any slate of candidates that did not include women. In some cases, more women than not. In the last vacancy that we had on the board that I chair, because I wanted to see more balance, we asked the nominating committee to bring us, we gave the background and skills criteria, and I said, find me just women that fit there and bring us a slate of just women, because we want to increase the number of women on the board. And they brought some really phenomenal women, because they're out there. And we're going through the process. We haven't concluded that yet. So I guess one thing I would offer is we have to be very deliberate about how we approach this. We've seen Stanislav's work, which truly struck me. They're just biases, and it's just the way folks think. It's not that anybody's right or wrong, but it's the conditioning that you automatically think of a man for a replacement. You automatically think of a man for chair. So we have to be very deliberate in asking for specific gender balance in slates that we view. So that's one. Reviewing charters to make sure we also have those, and of course, making it a priority that you have balance on your board.
Okay, and does the balance that you have on your board, is that driven down into your exco? Do you have similar balance in your exco, and how have you achieved that? All right,
thank you for that question. So maybe I'll take that to 5 years ago. This board that I chair, I joined it about 5 years ago. When I first joined, this was one of the first areas that I would say my contribution, and this is why it's so important to have other women on the board. the board wasn't tracking the balance, diversity, etc. So the first thing that I requested, because I sat on the nominations committee and also the compensation committee, is to start tracking, to just get the data. You know, what does our staff complement look like across, you know, and starting from the bottom up. We wanted to see, and the numbers didn't look good, okay? I'm not gonna lie about that. We made a very deliberate and concerted effort and challenged the executive team to start reporting every quarter, and we still receive these numbers. So before today's, in preparing for today's effort, I asked for the latest as of this quarter. From where we started across the organization, when we started, we were a little under 30% 5 years ago. Across the organization today, we're sitting at 47% women. At the ExCo level, we've made progress, but not meaningful progress. And I say that because it doesn't match the progress. We're almost at half now, at 47% women from where we started. Probably in another year, we will reach 50-50. But at our ExCo level, we're still showing roughly 20%. But what we do have, though, is the pipeline. And this is what we're monitoring. So the recent, if we had this panel a year ago, I would have said our ExCo, our management team is probably about 10% or 15% thereabouts. But there's been a promotion since then, internal promotion, and this is from the pipeline that we've been monitoring over the years. The board, and I have to say, I've had some really strong allies in my male fellow directors who have also taken this as a priority since we started monitoring it, challenging the management team, making decisions around promotions where we're asking, who are the potential candidates? What does our bench strength look like? And is it reflective of the balance that we're trying to achieve? And all of these things have helped us move forward. We're not where we want to be yet, but my goodness, we've made a lot of progress across the organization.
Okay, congratulations, well done. And I think those points about having the data, knowing where you are, knowing where you want to get to, and relentlessly tracking that is really important. Because if you don't have that information, then it isn't going to happen. It's the classic, what gets measured gets done. So a few important points there, and I'll ask Stanislav to comment in a minute, but for women to get experience of chairing committees is really important. In the UK, it is difficult to get experience of chairing the nominations committee because that's usually the chairman of the board. And by definition, that's frequently a male. So women tend to do remuneration committee, audit committee, risk, ESG, and some of the other committees, be that corporate social responsibility, to get that chairing experience, which is so important. So Stanislav, over to you.
Thank you. My first point is it's actually about data, and I think it's about research. I think what needs to happen, that people who make nomination decisions, they should become more familiar with current research about what makes chairs effective. And if we look at the research, that we see that what makes CEOs effective is not necessarily what makes chairs effective. Actually, often it's the opposite. Things that make CEOs effective do not help very much in the role of a board leader. Yes, the research shows there are two important hard skills that the board chair has to have, and I mentioned already business acumen, understanding how business operates, and the second one is systemic thinking. But again, in order to develop those skills, you do not necessarily need to be a CEO. And then it's a number of soft skills, or so-called soft skills. It's about listening, it's about questioning, it's about providing feedback, it's about framing questions. And there is some research that shows that women arguably are better at those skills than men. So I think if people who make nomination committees sort of familiarize themselves with the research, they'll get a better idea of what the profile that they're looking for. It will open up their eyes to other candidates, not to female candidates. That's the first step. I think the second step is very important to sort of they expand the pool of potential candidates. Where are the people who have those skills in addition to CEOs? And we already mentioned vice presidents, people who are in charge of finance, like chief financial officers, people who are in charge of operations, people who are in charge of marketing and sales. They all have this business acumen. So the second layer of senior management, I think they all potentially very good candidates to become board chairs. Then you think about strategy consultants and their partners. They also have the skills. You think about private equity. You think about people in legal profession. They're senior partners. They also have the skills. And if you look at this, and we look at the numbers for UK, then immediately you will expand your potential pool of chairs to somewhere from 200 to 400 people. That's a huge difference. And it's a huge potential for people who make nomination decisions.
Okay, thank you. That's a super point. Beatrice, there's a question for you from the audience, which is, have any male candidates missed out on opportunities as a result of your gender policy, and did they leave as a result?
So, short answer is no. And let me step back and explain why. So, of course, you know, our current gender policy is balance, diversity. Balance is ensuring within the ranks that we have a good balance of men and women. What that meant was being very deliberate. And deliberate meant a culture change in the mindset of how we think about recruiting. It just happens, you know, we've all been through the corporate world, you know, if a man is hiring, we just saw Stanislav's report, you would immediately think of a man. But actually, you know, our executives do the hiring, the board doesn't. The board just gives the direction and strategy and what we want to see and our goals. And it's the executive team that hires these folks and see that among the slate they see the women are qualified. In fact, you know, all of the women that we've hired over the last few years, certainly the more senior level ones, the management level and the next level, have been true, you know, superstars that will stack up against any man. So that's one. So it's the the people that we attract in. Now that doesn't mean we're firing anyone. It just means when there's a vacancy, rather than, you know, we want to see a balanced slate of candidates and we pick the best, you know, from there. We've hired men over women and we've hired women over men. We just want the best candidate. And they are there in both the men and the women.
Okay, thank you. That's an important point you make. The talent is out there. It's just a question of deliberately and purposefully looking for it and attracting it to your organisation. Byron, you've got your mic off. I'm assuming you want to say something.
I was going to follow up on Beatrice's point respective specifically to the listed companies in the United States at present, but I'm seeing this trend globally, and that is we have roughly 6,000 public companies. In 2015, that was predominantly specific to Stanislav stats, and going forward, the one difference I would offer to Beatrice's current experience is we are going to have to ask some male board members to step down in order to pick up the metrics that we want to achieve over the next 5 years. So people, whereas I've been involved in some of this, it's not a firing, it's more of a, okay, we've got to have 2 people step down. We've got 10, let's say we have 10 board members with 1 female and we want to achieve at least 3 in the next year or 2. Somebody's got to raise their hand. If the rotation period is 3 years from now, somebody's going to have to raise their hand and step down. So we need males to voluntarily step down. And look, we're listing new companies every day. They can go to another board. But we do have to have this turnover. And then the one other piece I would kind of connecting a couple dots is one of the things we are seeing, and I know PwC's research with boards last year, is that women just more intuitively connect ESG issues with corporate strategy, which is an interesting nuance to just to Stanislav's point, the differences that women and men bring, along with then respective differences individually from skill sets. So those are a couple of thoughts I wanted to chime in after those.
Okay, no, that's really insightful. Thank you. There's another question for you, Beatrice. You seem to be getting the lion's share of the questions at the moment, which is, was it a challenge for you when you were working full-time to carve out time to become a non-executive director, and how supportive were your employers?
Such an excellent question, because, you know, to be a board member, you have to make that commitment. And so I have to say, it's a balancing act, you know, no pun intended. It meant, you know, I didn't get, you know, as much free time as I would have wanted to, because I couldn't drop the ball in my full-time job either. The first thing I did, of course, you know, in my role as GC, was I approached my board chair when the first opportunity came to say, look, I've been approached for this, and you know, would like the support of the company to join the board, because I clearly saw it as a good opportunity. I've always wanted to join boards. My chairman was supportive, and we discussed it with our board, and they all were supportive. As long as I didn't drop the ball on my day job, they were fine for me to join the board. And so it was a personal commitment to put in the extra work, essentially, and that's what it's going to have to take to juggle all of those. But once you get the hang of it, and you know, eventually your calendar just seems to work out quite well, you can carve out those 2 or 3 days that you commit to a board. You read the papers, you go to the board, and of course, if it's an industry you understand, you're able to offer, you know, some value. And over the years, it became a lot easier. But I have to confess, initially, it was a balancing act. You just had to put in the extra work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so it has to be something you really want to do, you're passionate about it, you're purposeful towards it. There's a question here for Stanislav, which is, have you compared the results of companies with female chairs to male chairs, and are those results any better?
Well, this is a very interesting question, and we've been thinking and trying to sort of approach this question for a number of years now. But as you can understand, it's a very challenging issue to find a metric for that, because what do you compare? Do you compare return on equity? Do you compare financial performance of the company? And do you link effectiveness of a chair with this one? That's probably not the best way to measure it, because the chair is responsible for the board. The chair is not responsible for the company. So we're still trying to figure out if we could come up with the metrics. What we definitely found is that female chairs seems to be better at handling crises. There are fewer crises when you have a female board leader. Boards or companies with female board chairs have fewer crises than companies with male chairs. And then when crisis happens, they seem to be more effective in handling this. So that's a piece of information that we managed to find so far. It was a technical question, Helen. Do you mind if I answer this?
You carry on.
Yeah, what is a systemic thinking? Systemic thinking, it's ability to see the woods behind the trees, basically to see how the things are linked. And this is very important for a chair who is an orchestrator of a governance system in the country.
Okay, thank you. Avivah, you were just making a point in the chat. Would you like to come in and just explain what you were saying there? Can we allow Avivah in to do that? Good. Because it's about the COVID situation. Avivah, over to you.
Yes, no, I mean, just the point that I had to laugh when Stanislav said female leaders are looking like they're doing better in crisis, because this is just what COVID has shown us on a national scale, that female leaders around the world seems to have managed their COVID crises better as well. There's been a lot of media attention on that. And one of my maybe subsequent questions are linked is, do you think the public sector is much better at becoming a kind of balanced meritocracy? Why do we now have female leaders of so many public organizations like the European Commission, the European Central Bank, the US Treasury Secretary, the US Vice President, the World Trade Organization, the IMF, the World Bank? What is it about the business sector that seems to struggle so much with getting women right to the top, which, as Stanislav is saying, seems to be this juggernaut to getting them to be board and board chairs?
And that is a really valid point. There are a lot of very good chairs in public boards. And one of the issues has been, when we talk about Stanislav saying broaden the pool and broaden the thinking, for a long time, there's been a view you couldn't move from the public to the private sector. And yet you have chairmen in there who are managing a complex set of stakeholders and relationships within politics, with the media, and so have huge amount of skill, but it's not always been as attractive to private sector organisations to take public sector chairs in. So that would be another pool that I would certainly advocate we add to Stanislav's pool in terms of that. Byron, have you got any views on that in the States?
Well, we've seen tremendous change in thinking over the last few years, and I think our political environment has impacted our business environment to think differently and to be more critical about our thinking. Unfortunately, I think that turning around biases requires a lot more seminars like this for us to think together on how change can occur. The one point I would emphasize is that I do see, if you're not a follower of this, it's worth reading, and that is Larry Fink from BlackRock. His note to CEOs is interesting this year because it focuses on the E side of ESG, which I find that hits all of us equally. If we get the E part wrong, if we really get the E part wrong, we're all in trouble so we're all in the same, proverbial boat together. And I see a tendency, and I hope this proliferates over the next couple of years, and I would encourage women thinking in this direction to be involved in ESG related issues quite actively, because there's a tremendous amount. If you look at the stats on the amount of money being poured into ESG initiatives from a profit-seeking perspective, but profit in more ways than one, not just financial profits. And it's a trend, and it's one that has been quite popularized in universities over the last few years in the United States, that tend to be more women gaining graduate degrees in ESG-related issues. So I think we might see that continue to play out as an important component of leadership, and therefore chairman or chairwomanship in boardrooms in the future.
Okay, thank you. Stanislav, do you want to add anything?
No. There was a question on quotas, so to speak, on regulating chairs. I may say a few things about this if you think it.
Yes, that would be helpful. Yeah.
When we did our research, we asked this question in our conversation with our respondents, and most of the people we spoke with found that it's probably not a realistic idea to have quotas, because you have only one chair in the board, so it's a little bit challenging. Of course, what you can say, every 5 years you have to have alteration between female and male chair, but then it runs into the complication. So I think it's less the regulation. I think it's more education and enlightenment that will help to solve this problem. But what the examples of some shareholders shows that they can have an impact if they decide they would like to have it. They would like to strive for balance. then they will set the example. They will prove to others that that could be done, and I think it will have a strong impact on the whole business community.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And that was certainly a conclusion that was reached in the first of these seminars, that quotas weren't the answer. It was much more the education and the, if you like, the inquisitive mindset to source the right kind of talent within the organisation as opposed to quotas. So I think we've got some agreement there across the two sessions, and shareholders have a hugely important role to play in all of this. So that's quite helpful. Some of the other comments that have been coming up are that, do women have more of a coaching mindset? And is that why it's so helpful? And are women better at managing risk than men? Beatrice, your view.
Sure. So I will tend to say probably so. Women tend to be better risk managers. I had a laugh when Stanislav was talking about women having fewer crises under female leaders. It's actually because the crises are managed, so you don't see them boil over to a crisis. On a daily basis, I deal with near crises. Before we got on this call, I was on with our CEO dealing with something that just emerged, and we manage it and discuss what he needs to do, who he needs to involve, and then hopefully we keep things under control. So from that perspective, yes. By our nature, and certainly speaking about myself personally, I'm always, maybe it's my training as a lawyer too. When I look at our business broadly, I'm always thinking and anticipating things. And when, my CEO comes to me with things to talk about, he frequently tells me I'm 1 or 2 steps ahead of him. Because, I offer him, okay, how about we do this? And how about you think about doing that? Okay, we should call this small meeting. No need to blow this over. Let's talk through this and get these folks involved. And then hopefully it doesn't blow out too much. So yes, from that perspective, yes. And if I may, just add one more perspective on, what we could do. This is something we quite haven't figured out yet how to perfect it or how to do it right. But it seems to me that a growing conversation in the boardroom should be how to link compensation to delivery of goals. So this is not a quota or target or anything. We do it differently on my boards, on the different boards I sit on, where in one we use it, we use delivery of it's broad diversity targets. It's more of a multiplier for when we do the variable compensation. I've started conversations about hard coding it and assigning weightings to it, and I've received some pushback from other, but so it's a conversation that I'm going to keep having until I get buy-in that it does make sense, because I've truly seen that when you start, these conversations were happening years ago, even about compliance, when we started tying compensation to delivery of, an acceptable risk environment, management and frankly the boards, made it a priority. So this is a conversation that I think we should all start thinking about having in the boardrooms. I'm not sure, who has gotten it quite right, but I think we should continue to discuss it until we figure out the way to tie compensation to delivery of balanced goals. The board tells you, and what is the right weighting? Because and some say it's not fair. If you tie my compensation to it, maybe I'm not getting the right candidates. So we need to have those conversations.
Yeah. Okay. Byron or Stanislav, do you want to add anything there?
Well, I always try to be very careful to avoid generalizations, especially generalizations like women better at managing risk. I think it's a very risky proposition. What we definitely know from research is that women are less risk averse than men on average. But again, this is on average. If we assume that board is a major risk management device, and that the primarily task of the board is value protection, then probably we can explain what I've said earlier. Having a person who is less risk averse than a male chair as the chair for that could be an explanation why they're a little bit better and at avoiding crises. But again, I think what we need a balance in when it comes down to risk, because if we don't take risk, then we don't create value. The only way to create value is to take risk, and boards have to encourage management to take risks. They have to create framework for management to take risks. So I think it's an excellent point to illustrate the whole issue that we're debating here, that we need to have balance. It's not about one or another. It's about having both and the best of both.
Yeah. Okay.
And one way that balance is exercised is is evaluating the differences between risk sensitivity of an organization to that point of what are the opportunities versus the downsides, and then the management of risk once an opportunity is being capitalized upon. So there is a bifurcation that occurs in the decision process, particularly when a strategy is being presented from management to a board to evaluate. They're looking at, okay, we've got a sensitivity. What's the risk tolerance of this organization? And then once we make a decision, what are we going to employ as the management of those risks as we move forward? So I think those two, when we look at it through those lenses, I find it's a little more about the experience and the background of each individual, male or female, and it's more importantly about the two groups, whoever is in each camp, say the more and less risk averse, working together and that what we call in the boardroom healthy tension, that pulling and pushing of how far and how much should we hold back. Say on a good example of this that's been misused in the past is M&A, meaning that too many boards have been too quick to approve M&A exercises 20 years ago that really weren't well aligned. Now we're seeing that those sensitivities are being brought to bear more holistically. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing improvement in boardrooms as women come on boards, is there's more diversity of perspective in evaluating an M&A opportunity, for example.
Okay, thank you.
Spot on there. A clear example of why balance on the board is very important.
Yep.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're all agreed that it's important. There are a number of good suggestions there in terms of how to broaden the pool, bring more people in. The board's remit has widened considerably over the last few years. It's no longer just signing off the strategy and kicking the tires on the finances. There's culture, there's tone, there's remuneration, there's ESG. There's a whole range of things that boards now have to have insight into, which means you do need more diverse skill and talent within the boardroom. So we agreed that it should happen. It's a business imperative. We've explored some of the hows. My next question before we get into, and I've tried to weave in questions from the audience along the way, but we will give some more time shortly. But my next question is, when are we going to move beyond the talking? I shared with the panel before we started that I've recently found my first thesis that I wrote into the career development of women in management in 1985. And a lot of the issues that existed then still exist now. So when are we going to move beyond talking about it? Because this should be something that just happens if we've put the right energy, reward, focus, whatever it is, into, as Beatrice was saying, her approach when she went into her role as chair. If we've done those things, then why would we need to continue debating it? So could I just have some very quick views on when we're going to stop talking about it because it's there?
I think we will stop talking about this and we'll start doing that as soon as we have a significant number of people who actually making nomination decisions participating in the conversation that we're having today. I think we have a very, very respectful, very great list of participants, but how many people who make nomination decisions are on this list? There are not that many yet. So we need to get these people involved. They need to listen to what we're talking about today.
Okay. Byron?
I'll jump in and let Beatrice go last on this one. In the work that we've done over the last 6 months, I'm seeing more activity in the area of diversity on boards than over the last 10 years. So I think we're hitting critical mass, and over the next 18 months, we're going to see significant change in this area towards the positive. And I hope that rings true around the world.
Okay. Beatrice?
So I do agree with that. We will stop talking about it when we hit critical mass, but when are we going to hit critical mass? It seems, what programs like this, we end up preaching to the choir. I was struck by the initial poll, by the number of folks, that are in attendance. There are folks that are already engaged or that are already sympathizers. When are we going to get the non-sympathizers to the table so that we engage meaningfully and get them to buy into this? And once we're able to do that, or find the forum where we can engage them meaningfully and turn them into allies, we're going to begin to see that real critical mass. And of course, the decision-making that needs to happen to promote and invite more females to the board. There are many talented women. We don't need to focus on just CEOs. CEOs are phenomenal, but we just don't have enough of them. But we do have very talented CFOs, very talented COOs, very talented CTOs, and frankly, very talented general counsel. So we can, who have a lot of operational experience, and we can broaden those pools and bring those perspectives into the boardroom, and we'll begin to see some real meaningful progress.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. We have Ronan in the audience who spoke at the last session. Ronan, you've just put something in the Q&A, which I think you should speak to, which is very pertinent about removing people who don't walk the talk. So Ronan, over to you.
Thank you. So my question was, in the spirit of when does the conversation finish and the action really get traction, if I may use that expression. So my question was, when will it become sufficiently important and relevant to boards that they will have and they will exercise the mandate to remove senior executives who simply don't walk the walk?
Yeah.
Because if this is ultimately a shareholder value driving, which I passionately believe it is, when will we have sufficient belief to say, okay, this is so important that I'll deal with, trade-off between short-term expediency and long-term sustainability of the performance of the business?
Okay.
One obvious is when shareholders pick and choose based on that perspective, Ronan.
Very true. Okay. Well, thank you for that. I just want to thank the panel before we move to more general questions. A lot of insights there, a lot of good ideas, which I'm sure we can all take away. A lot of comments in the chat about how right this is. A request for more Beatrices, so we'll have to clone you, Beatrice. And generally an acceptance that this can be done, this should be done, it's the right thing to do, and we need to make sure we move to consistent and sustained action in this area. So what I'd like to do now is throw this open to questions. As ever, there's not many questions in the Q&A. It tends to come more into the chat and the comments. A view here about convincing CEOs it's time to do all of this. that you don't have any one dominant group. So what other questions might we have? Post them in Q&A or flag that you want to ask the panel a question, and I will try and facilitate us through that in the last 8 or so minutes. Have a look. Right, it's a question for you, Byron, as to whether the likes of BlackRock and so on, are they saying they won't invest in businesses unless this is addressed? And are you seeing traction as a result of that?
This is what is being said by Vanguard, State Street, BlackRock, which we're right there. We're talking about $15 trillion of assets under management or more. And then Fidelity, as many may know, is actually led by another female CEO.
Yeah.
So I believe that we're headed in this direction. Now they are. This is a pivotal year, 2021. I think that there was in some ways there was a slight pause just because we were all a bit shell-shocked in 2020 from COVID, but these initiatives seem to have moved forward from 2020 to 2021, and it feels, this is anecdotal so far, but I think this is going to be a pivotal year for us to talk about this exact subject and measure it January 2022 to say, how did we do in 2021? Is this a watershed year, or is there a lot of talk and not enough action? So I sense that the large investors are going to take action this year.
Thank you. 2 other questions. First one is, do you see more traction among younger men to put women into NED positions or positions of seniority? Are there any examples that you can point to of the younger vanguard being more positive and pro this?
I think so. I think that sort of the new generation of people who are in their 50s and who are members of nomination committees or who represent shareholders, they are much more open to the idea of having female directors. And again, I think for most of the larger companies, the public companies, we've hit the momentum, and I think the parity and the balance in the boardroom is not far away. But when it comes to a chair position, the situation is still different. And even those sort of younger decision makers, they still have a tendency to think along the old lines.
Yeah, and I would echo that as well. So, okay. Do we have any examples of flagship companies that we'd like to say, yes, you know, these are a real example of companies that are getting this right? Byron? You're on mute.
Yeah. I would like to think that NASDAQ is getting this right. I can tell you, I came to this company by an acquisition. And as I did the research of what this company was composed of, it caused me, I could have gone other places, by the way. I intentionally came to NASDAQ because what I saw on the board and what I saw in leadership. But I'm seeing others. There are, Guardian Insurance in the United States, run by she just stepped down, but she's done a tremendous job over the last several years, Deanna Mulligan. And then she's going to do other things, likely on boards and other places. We are seeing these sorts of movements steadily improving. So that's a couple examples off the top of my head.
Yeah, Beatrice?
So I will tend to agree with Byron. To be honest, most of the companies that I look at seem, well, let me speak from the boards that I sit on. We're all a work in progress. We haven't quite gotten it right. And, when I look across the industries that I operate in, I'm not seeing, anyone that we want to emulate. We're all striving and working towards achieving those goals. But certainly when I see some of the companies that are run by women, you tend to see more of the balance show through. But, I can't speak for a fact that they're getting it as right as they could be.
Okay, thank you. Ronan, do you want to say anything about Verizon?
Look, I wouldn't want to claim that any of us have arrived on this journey, but between the structure of our board and the depth of diversity on it, which has been the case for quite some time, but certainly personally, I'm proud of the fact that I lead an executive team that has a people of color majority and a female majority, and I think it's the reason we have is because it makes us the best team in the industry, not because it scores us points on metrics. So we're always more to do, but I think we're getting traction.
Excellent, thank you.
And Helen, I follow Verizon closely, and I endorse that. So for what it's worth, I applaud what Verizon's done over the last several years.
Yeah, and it's certainly very visible on social media and promotes a great deal of balance in business, which is absolutely great. So it's good to see. Another question. Sorry, another question that's.
Sorry, I was just going to commend Ronan on really being a leader in this space as well. When you see someone who's pushing progress, we should definitely call them out and encourage them to keep doing more.
Yeah. Very, very well said, very much so. There's been another question come in about gender pay gap reporting and whether we have a view that this will further drive balance. Has anyone got any commentary on that?
So I can offer a few thoughts on it. So two of my boards, both New York boards, not the ones that I chair, I have to say, since we've had more females on the board, there's been a lot more focus on the pay gap, which is real. It's not phantom, and the board has been paying more attention to it, and we've been closing the gap. I'm very proud to say, we've done a lot of work just over the last few years. The board that I chaired, that work started a while ago. There was no question, there was disparity. The management team where the women were, in a different end of the pay scale versus their male counterparts. But because you have a balanced board, there's been more focus on it.
Okay, good. Any other insights into that, Stanislav?
I think it's the question is, do other countries have similar initiatives? And the yes, they do. I think when you bring attention to this issue, it builds up awareness, and that is very helpful. So from that perspective, I think it's a positive initiative. Should we expect that initiative like this one on its own will change the balance in business? Of course not. But it's one of the drops that will help the bucket to become full at some point.
Okay, good. Thank you. So I think we're now at a point where we need to pull this towards a close and hand back to our organizer, Florence. But thank you, everybody. I hope that the audience believe we've had a good discussion across a wide range of things that need to happen. And I think we do need to think about how do we get people into these kinds of audiences who aren't already signed up for this and spread the word further to get more adopters in this area. And it sounds like that's going to take a mix of investor pressure, talent pressure, financial performance pressure, ESG issues. So a lot of things that could really drive this change. But Beatrice mentioned earlier the importance of the culture of the organization and how the board aids the driving of this, because Stanislav is right. The board are responsible for the stewardship of the company across all the strands, but the executive are responsible for running the business. So setting that right tone at the top, having more visible role models at the top as women in the chairman role and so on is all very important. But lots of good ideas here. So thank you, everybody. And thank you for the chat that's still going quite strongly at the moment. And some of the questions that have come in, we'll take a look at those later. And if we can answer them online, we will. But I'd like to hand back to Florence now to formally close the session.
Thank you, Helen. But I feel that, you know, you're doing such a marvelous job wrapping it all together and putting all the points that you've done the wrapping up for me. I thank you very much for that. It's fantastic. And I thank all of the panelists for doing an amazing job and sharing with us their insights and their experience in a very open way. I hope all of you in the audience have really enjoyed this. And as Helen said, we'll take a look at the questions that you left, or if afterwards you have some further questions and you would be interested in, do send it to us. We'd like to have perhaps some more discussions between this session and the third one, which will be closing the whole series, which is the talent series, which takes place in October. So we hope to see you there, where we're going to tie in all three, the CEO's perspective, the board perspective, and from a talent perspective, how it all goes. So I thank you all very much, and until next time.